say, national level, there have been several workshops going on about intellectual property. I just attended one a few days ago where they wanted to a policy, make it into a policy and an implementation plan for, say, different departments to actually follow and guide, maybe SMEs, maybe, say, resource owners or kind of stuff. So we had this one particular, say, object on display that kind of give a distinction between owners, a patent, a owner, and a, say, a cover. So in that way, you kind of, because at the moment you have a lot of views going on Facebook about objects of cultural significance that are more or less kind of commercialized, especially taboo. Yeah. Tabu wanem or tabu and the bilum na kind of them. So there's been debates going on, and this particular object kind of, if you look at it in a way, it kind of distinguishes the different roles that the different parties play. Kind of some cover, the owner, and more or less kind of the patent. Patent is kind of the institution that governs it, you think. So that Malagan itself has the story associated to it would be the owner. Take, for example, you are the cover, I'm the owner. So me come to you and me talk him yourself. Please, Jordan, I want you to carve my story. So on that carving, I said, my favorite bird is probably, say, a kingfisher, maybe. And then my totemic plant would be maybe a fen. And me like talking you to Osem, but you, I once visited this, say, mountain, and I think the gods are not happy with me, and I met a snake on the way. So time me look at snake and I me kill him snake and water tight. So with that, you carve him go on top like me, my totemic, say, plant would be that fan, but you carve him fan go on top, and then my animal would be that kingfisher, but you carve him kingfisher go on top, and then a snake, and then a river on that side, but you put him go on top too. So that's more or less kind of a storyboard. Yeah. So me ask him, you make him. You make him love me, but you do not own that. You make him love me, you give him come love me, and I own it. So that's mine. So in that way, I'm kind of differentiating myself. The patent more or less kind of guide it only. You only the cover, so there has to be some rules that governs how the cover and one, and then me as the owner. So I'm the one that give you ideas on how to actually put the thing on that carving kind of stuff. So that particular object is interesting, especially when you look at it in terms of intellectual property rights. Yeah, at the moment, you're trying to identify, say, one particular bilum pattern to, or say, put it to one particular area. You can't, because I have some displays within that gallery that shows that mothers from Eastern Highlands came up with the idea of, say having a mountain pattern, a mountain pattern or a skin peak pattern. But if you look at the displays that we have within those cabinets there are mountain patterns and skin peak patterns already being, say, used in, say, Kairoku, for example. So the dates when those bilums were collected was like 1976. And we had this issue about, associating one particular pattern to only one area came about just lately. Yeah. So if you look at it, we can't associate one particular pattern to only one area, even though the mother that actually gave that name as a diamond pattern or as a mountain pattern or as a skin peak pattern has her own story to tell. So yeah, the pattern itself, no God, we can't only associate it to one geographical area, but anywhere else. If it's in Kairoku, maybe it was actually, used or being woven in Sipik or wherever else that the bilum or string bag is commonly used. So yeah, likewise, so some going forward, if you look at this intellectual property, yeah, belums you can't associate it to one particular area. Because I know NCC and IPA has actually signed an agreement where any objects of, what do they call it, traditional objects or cultural objects, something, will be discouraged, especially with, say, Chinese running them on fabrics and that. So yeah, the fight is still on unless we can distinguish what time period can we say these objects are traditional and when it's foreign. Take, for example, for Bilum, not many mothers are using the traditional dyes and the traditional fibers. So they've actually gone ahead to use wool and string, nylon string. So it has evolved as well. And if you consider for the museum, if we are to try and distinguish, the string and the wool would be more or less modern, contemporary item compared to what we have already in our collection that is more or less traditional. So it's
really hard to pinpoint.
Yes, it's a big challenge. And take, for example, again on Bilums, if now that this law is in place, and I decided to come up with a totally new pattern at all, new plastreta, pattern Bilum. So I'm claiming ownership rights of it now. In 20 years' time, down the line, it will become a traditional design. It's a history. So when can we sort him as that's a traditional pattern and that's a modern pattern. So yeah, I think
that law will come into place and differentiate.
The
owner, the
crafter, and the user, and all of those. So yeah, it's a bit challenging for PNG, I should say.
Yeah.
Whereas if you look at other, say, developed countries now, especially the indigenous communities, they've evolved. And they've associated certain, maybe say, logos and that. For us, we have a lot of cultural objects that are here. And if we are to, say, tie them all into the intellectual property thing, we have to give certain dates to them.
Yeah.
We have to identify certain values to them. Maybe say set a criteria, and from that criteria we can assess the values.
Then you have to trace back.
Exactly.
All the way back.
Yeah, kind of this particular value blow display. Then some of the values that I can identify through that would be authenticity, maybe integrity, maybe aesthetic value belong. So they have some designs or patterns or kind of some. So it's not just a work of art, maybe a story associated to it, kind of some. So yeah, narapla walking make him to ya. If I am to break down and touch on one aspect of probably science or maths, kind of some, you can get it out of one particular object, but different, maybe physics of it, maybe chemistry of it, even technology-wise. So plant is something Black and Kissim just out of our objects here. Unlike those of other national museums around the world, the indigenous population would not have that kind of rich values that we have with one particular object.